The old road ended abruptly, swallowed by the forest. We had to leave the car and walk the last mile. The cabin wasn't on any map, a forgotten place deep in the woods, shrouded in a fog so thick it felt like we were breathing water. They said a family had vanished here a century ago, but we just thought it was a good story, a local legend to spook tourists. We were wrong. The front door groaned open under my hand, a long, drawn-out complaint that echoed into the silent interior. The air that rushed out was stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something faintly sweet and rotten, like flowers left to decay in a vase for too long. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, painting a narrow path across the floor. Dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the light. The furniture was all there, draped in thick cobwebs that looked like funeral shrouds. An old rocking chair sat by the cold stone fireplace. A grandfather clock stood silent against the far wall, its hands frozen at midnight. A soft whisper slithered past my ear. I spun around, heart jumping into my throat. Nothing. Just the wind. I told myself, just the wind sighing through the broken panes of a window. But the sound hadn't been like wind. It had been sibilant, almost like a word I couldn't quite catch. I took a few steps further in, my boots crunching on fallen plaster and debris. The beam of my flashlight swept across a wall, and I stopped. There were scratches in the old, peeling wallpaper. Not random marks, but deliberate, intricate symbols, like some forgotten alphabet. As I stared, a fresh scratch appeared, a thin white line carving itself into the wood paneling with a faint, dry, scraping sound. It moved slowly, deliberately, forming another strange, twisted sigil. My breath hitched. The wind couldn't do that. I tried to rationalize it. Old house, settling wood, animals. But a cold dread was beginning to seep into my bones. A primal fear that had nothing to do with logic. I turned my back to the wall, trying to focus on exploring the main room. I scanned the fireplace, the dusty mantelpiece, the boarded-up windows. When I turned back, the rocking chair by the hearth was moving. It swayed back and forth, a slow, gentle rhythm, as if someone had just gotten up from it, but no one was there. The creak of the wood was the only sound in the suffocating silence. My hand, holding the flashlight, began to tremble. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting around the room, trying to see into the deep shadows that clung to the corners. I kept the chair in my peripheral vision, watching its steady, ghostly motion. My light landed on a small side table. A dusty porcelain teacup sat there next to a tarnished silver spoon. I looked away for a second, scanning the ceiling, and when my light returned to the table, the spoon was gone. My eyes widened. I swept the beam across the floor. Searching, then I heard it. A faint clinking sound from across the room. I followed the noise, and there, in the center of the floor, was the spoon. It couldn't have rolled there. It was too far, and the floor was uneven. It felt like the cabin was playing a game with me, a slow, malicious game of hide-and-seek. The air grew colder, and the silence felt heavier, pressing in on me. The whispers started again, louder this time, coming from all directions at once. They weren't words, just overlapping, breathy hisses that seemed to worm their way inside my head. The floorboards above me groaned, a heavy, measured tread, like someone pacing back and forth. But this was a single-story cabin. There was no upstairs. Suddenly, a loud thud came from outside, somewhere in the woods. It sounded like a tree falling, but heavier, more final. I rushed to the nearest window, peering through a crack in the boards. The fog was a solid wall of white. I couldn't see anything. I held my breath, listening. Silence. The woods were utterly still, too still. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an absolute void of sound. When I turned back into the room, the world tilted. Every photo frame on the walls had been turned upside down. The grandfather clock's hands were now spinning backward, a frantic, silent blur, and the rocking chair was no longer rocking. It was facing me directly. The whispers swirled around me, coalescing into a single, chilling voice, a woman's voice, distorted and filled with ancient rage. It chanted something in a language I didn't understand, the words sharp and gut. My flashlight began to flicker violently, strobing between blinding light and total darkness. In one of the flashes I saw her, a tall, gaunt figure standing in the far corner of the room, just at the edge of the light. She was a silhouette of deeper black against the shadows, her form indistinct, wavering. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle. In the next flash, she was gone. Panic surged through me, hot and sharp. I lunged for the front door, rattling the knob, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked, sealed shut, as if it were welded to the frame. The back door, the windows, all of them, were sealed. I was trapped. The chanting grew louder, echoing, seeming to come from inside the very walls of the cabin. A book flew off a shelf and slammed against the wall next to my head. The teacup from the table shot across the room and shattered against the fireplace. The air became a storm of flying debris, dust and splinters. The chaos was deafening. I dropped to the floor, covering my head, the claustrophobia crushing me. The room was a vortex of supernatural fury. Furniture scraped across the floor, levitating a few inches before crashing down. The whispers turned into screams, high-pitched, agonized shrieks that tore at my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see the strobing flashes of my dying flashlight against my eyelids. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The chaos had stopped. The room was still. My flashlight lay on the floor a few feet away, its beam now a weak, steady circle, and standing within that circle was the woman. I could see her clearly now. She wasn't a ghost. Not exactly. Her form was solid, but it seemed to be made of shadow and smoke. Her face was a pale oval with no features, just two dark, hollow pits where her eyes should be. She wore a tattered, old-fashioned dress, and her long, skeletal fingers were clasped in front of her. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure she could hear it. I was paralyzed, pinned to the floor by a terror so profound it was physical. The sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears, a rapid, desperate rhythm. Then she raised one hand and pointed a long, shadowy finger at me, but her featureless face opened, a black gash in the pale oval, and a sound came out, not a scream, but a deep guttural roar that shook the very foundations of the cabin. The shadows in the room surged toward her, swirling around her like a cloak, then rushed toward me. I screamed, scrambling backward, but the darkness was too fast. It enveloped me, a cold, suffocating tide. My flashlight was kicked away, skittering across the floor before the light was finally swallowed. But the world went black. My scream was cut short, and then silence, a deep, profound silence that lasted for what felt like an eternity. The only thing that remained was the darkness, and a single final whisper right next to my ear. Mine